Need more wall space in your shop in which to store and organize your tools? I'm going to show you a cabinet that can double, even triple the amount of wall space in your shop without building more walls. Ow. We all need more space in our workshops, and I'm not talking about just floor space. Wall space can also be important. The floor is where we use our tools, but the wall is where we tend to store them, organize them, and keep them readily accessible. The fact is, in some workshops, like this one, the walls appear to be made of tools. And for those of you who are wall challenged, I'm about to build a shallow cabinet that will create more wall space by simply adding another layer on which to hang your tools. Both the back of the cabinet and the door panels are made from pegboard. You can also use slat wall if that's your preference. You just have to change the dimensions slightly to accommodate the thicker material. I prefer pegboard, and not just because pegboard is thinner and lighter. I have spent an entire lifetime collecting pegboard hangers, and now I think it's reasonable to assume that I have every pegboard fixture known to man, and some that man has forgotten. To make this cabinet as simple as possible, I'm going to make it from a single piece of pegboard cut up to make the panels and a few strips of hardwood cut up to make the sides, tops, and bottoms. I've sized the strips so that when the doors of the cabinet are closed, there will be 4 inches, a little over 100 millimeters, between the pegboard panels. This is room enough to hang most hand tools. However, should you need to increase the space, simply make the wood strips a little wider. The joinery is just as simple, a few rabbets and grooves. The sides of the cabinet case and the doors get rabbets in the ends, which I'm cutting with a dado. The pegboard panels are captured in grooves in the tops, bottoms, and sides. These grooves are 5/32 of an inch wide, about 4 millimeters. And I'm cutting those in 2 passes with a rip blade. All of this is pretty straightforward, but there is one detail that I should explain. All of the outboard vertical parts, the rightmost and leftmost sides of the doors in the case, are ripped 1/16 of an inch, that's 1.5 millimeters, narrower than the bottoms, tops, and inboard sides. This is confusing, I know, but stick with me, because just a little bit down the road, you're going to see how this creates spaces for the piano hinges. You'll want to test assemble all the parts to make sure they fit, but before you do, slightly chamfer all the edges of the pegboard panels with a sander or a scraper. For some reason, the edges of the hardboard from which the pegboard is made seems to swell up and gets much thicker than the hardboard itself. Chamfering the edges makes them fit much easier. Glue up the cabinet case before you assemble the cabinet doors. On this particular project, you can glue the panel in the grooves. I know it's traditional to let the panel float so that it can expand and contract independently of the other case parts. But we're not working with solid wood panels here. The expansion and contraction that you can expect from the pegboard is only 0.3 to 0.5% of its overall dimensions. It's very stable. The wooden top, bottom, and sides only expand 0.1 to 0.2% along their length parallel to the grain. These are also very stable in that particular direction. So you can glue all of these parts together if you want. It's really not that important a consideration when we're talking about the case. The case will be attached to the wall, and the weight of everything inside the case will be transferred to the wall. However, it becomes much more important when we're talking about the doors. The doors are only attached to the case by hinges on one side. The weight of the tools stored in the doors may cause them to sag, and gluing the door panels in their grooves will help prevent that, whether you glue the panel in place or not. Make sure that the case goes together square. As you can see, I'm using corner clamps to hold all the parts at right angles to one another. However, you can also make your own plywood corner squares. To double check, I'll also measure from corner to corner diagonally. For the case to be square, the diagonal measurements should match. Wait until the glue on the case is set up before gluing up the doors. That way you can assemble them and then clamp them to the case while the glue on the doors cures. This will ensure that the doors fit the case perfectly. First, dry assemble the doors and check that they fit on the case. This gives you a chance to adjust the dimensions if they're a little off. When you get to the glue up, tape strips of wax paper to the edges of the case to keep the doors from sticking to it. And do one door at a time so you have room for the clamps as you assemble them. We now have 3 boxes, 2 small, 1 large, and we need to attach the small boxes to the large box with hinges. Remember that we made the sides just a little bit narrower than the tops and the bottoms? Well, this has created gaps on both sides of the assembly, and this is where the hinges will go. But first, we need to square off the ends of the gaps where the tops and bottoms meet the sides. Use a chisel to remove the little bit of wood that stands proud and would otherwise interfere with the hinges. With the gaps squared off, you can now attach the hinges to the doors and the case. With these piano hinges, I like to fit and screw each hinge to its door, then remove it and fit and screw it to the case. Then finally, bring the door and the case together. This sounds like double work, I know, but it's a whole lot easier to fit the piano hinges and get all those screw holes in the right place when the hinges are unattached to anything else. Viola. Pretty cool, huh? But now I've got to take this whole thing apart because there's 5 more quick things that I've got to do before I can hang this monster. Attach cleats or lips to the bottom inside surfaces of each door. These cleats overhang the inside edges of the door and help align the doors with the case when you close them. They also help keep the door from sagging. And they provide places to attach plates for magnetic catches to keep the doors closed. Attach smaller cleats to the outside bottom surfaces of the doors. These serve as pulls to help open the doors. Glue some hanging strips to the top and bottom of the case behind the pegboard. We'll use these to marry the case to the wall. Attach a spacer block dead center in the back side of the pegboard of the case. I've learned from experience that when you hang these big pegboard panels, the pegboard wants to bow in towards the wall, and this eliminates the space you need to insert these pegboard hangers. This block will cover up a hole or 2, but it saves a lot of frustration down the road. And the last thing we need to do before we can hang this cabinet is do a little planing, a little sanding, and apply a finish. As you sand, plane a little bevel on the underside of the door cleats to help them catch the edge of the case, and round over the door pulls to make them more pleasant to grab onto. Now, I'm not going to make you watch the rest of the finishing process. We'll just skip right to the hanging. When you've reassembled the finished cabinet, decide where you want to hang it. And if the building has a wooden frame, locate the studs in the wall. Now for the hard part. We've got to get this cabinet up on the dead men, and I found this significantly easier if you can find yourself a Travis. I'm using lag screws rather than ordinary cabinet mounting screws. This will help support the weight of any humongous tool I may someday decide to hang in the cabinet. There is another reason for these lags. There is no such thing as a flat wall, and this particular wall has a pronounced bow to it. When I tighten the lag screws down and press the cabinet against this uneven wall, they pull the case out of shape, and as you can see, this causes one of the doors to spring. If I loosen one or more of the lag screws, the smooth shanks on the screws let me pull the cabinet away from the wall. Then I can place U-shaped shims of various thicknesses behind the case. With a little patience, I can get the case back to dead flat, even if the wall is a roller coaster. I think we're ready to fill this with tools. Place the tools that you use most often on the outside of the doors, and those you use occasionally inside the case. And if you want, you can also hang tools on both the inside and the outside of the doors. Something to think about while you're hanging stuff. The doors move, and so do the tools that you store on them. And you don't want to just hope that they're going to stay there and behave themselves while you're opening and closing the doors. They often need a retainer to keep them from dropping on your toes. Small bungee cords work well for this purpose. As I'm arranging these tools, you can better see the reasons for some of the construction details. You can see how the narrow outboard sides create a gap on each side of the cabinet for the piano hinges, and how the bottom lips, coupled with the door panels glued in place, really do prevent the doors from sagging. And there you go. Same wall, twice the storage. You'd probably guess the next step. Like, subscribe, and go to our store to buy something to help support everything we do here at Workshop Companion. And if you like this pegboard cabinet, you can find the plans for it there. As always, thank you for your kind attention. Good job.